All right, let's dive into BT Group's 2024 performance. We've got their annual report, financials, strategic plans, and even some notes on their sustainability work. It's a lot to unpack. But that's what we're here for. We're going to uncover how they're doing, where they're headed, and what it all means for you, especially if you're interested in their stock or the future of UK connectivity.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting time for them. They've just finished up a huge investment phase, really focused on full fiber broadband and 5G. So now we can really see if that investment's going to pay off.
Yeah, like we're waiting for the results of a huge experiment, huh? And speaking of experiments, BT Group is not your typical telecom company. They're involved in a lot of different things.
Definitely. That's what makes this deep dive so interesting. They're kind of like a conglomerate. They're in consumer markets, business solutions, infrastructure with open reach, even pushing the boundaries with their technology units.
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit. Imagine a company that's not only providing your internet at home, but they're also building the network, handling these massive corporate clients, and researching the next big thing in connectivity. That's BT Group.
Yeah, that makes them like a national champion, super woven into the digital fabric of the UK. But that also means they have to deal with really complicated regulations and keep up with the fast pace of technology.
It's a lot of pressure. So let's start with their different business segments. First up, we have consumer, which, as you can probably guess, focuses on individuals and households. What's the story there?
Well, they're seeing growth in their fiber products and mobile services, think like high-speed internet and the latest smartphones. But they're also facing a decline in their legacy products, like those traditional copper line phone services.
That makes sense. People are ditching the old landlines these days, right? So how are they dealing with this change in the consumer segment?
They're really focusing on moving customers over to those newer, higher value products. It's a bit of a balancing act, though, right? Because they need to manage that transition without pushing away customers who still depend on those old services.
Yeah. It's like trying to switch lanes on a busy highway.
Mhm. Yeah.
You have to time it just right. Okay, next we have business, which works with like over 1 million organizations in the UK and some big global clients too. What's the key to success there?
I think with business, the challenge is two things. They need to keep those long-term contracts, which provides stability, but they also need to adapt to the always changing needs of businesses in the digital age. Cybersecurity, cloud solutions, and custom networks are in really high demand.
So they can't just like sit back and relax with those big contracts, right?
Yeah.
They have to keep innovating, stay ahead of the game.
Exactly. If they get complacent, they'll be left behind in this fast-paced tech world.
Now, let's move on to OpenReach. This is where things get really interesting. They're literally building the infrastructure for the UK's digital future.
Yeah, OpenReach is a different beast. They're in charge of that massive rollout of full fiber, trying to bring super fast internet to millions of homes and businesses. They're also handling that complicated transition away from that old copper network, and that's a huge logistical and technological challenge.
It's like replacing the plumbing in a whole country while everyone's still using the sinks and
Oh,
showers.
that's yeah.
Impressive. What are some of the hurdles OpenReach is facing with this huge project?
Well, for one, it requires tons of capital. Laying down all that fiber optic cable means a big upfront investment. They also have to work with local authorities, deal with property rights, and manage expectations around construction disruptions.
Right. And they need to make sure this transition is smooth for everyone, right? Not everyone's jumping on the full fiber train at the same time.
Exactly. They're walking a tightrope, trying to push for progress, but also making sure nobody gets left behind without good internet. It's a tough balance.
Okay. Lastly, we have the technology units. This is where BT Group gets to experiment with some really cool cutting edge stuff, right?
Yeah, the technology units are kind of like their innovation engine. They're doing research and development in areas like AI, cloud computing, and they're even looking into the metaverse. This is where they're shaping the future of how we connect.
It's like they're building the road and designing the vehicles for a digital highway at the same time. So how do these technology units fit into BT Group's overall strategy?
They're super important for their long-term growth. By putting money into these emerging technologies, they can create new products and services, maybe even opening up totally new markets and revenue streams.
It's all about staying ahead of the curve, figuring out what's next before it even becomes a trend.
Exactly. And it's not just about what they do internally. They're also partnering with universities, startups, and other big tech companies to tap into the wider world of innovation.
Okay, so we have a good overview of their different business operations. Now, let's look at the financials. What kind of year did BT Group have?
Financially, this was a big year for BT Group. Remember that big investment phase we talked about? Well, they actually exceeded their cost-saving goal a whole year early, and they hit peak capital expenditure on their fiber rollout.
So they're starting to see the light at the end of that tunnel of heavy spending. That's got to be a relief.
Absolutely. Now they can shift their focus from pouring money into infrastructure to making money and giving value back to shareholders.
That's what we like to hear. Okay, give us the highlights. What were the key numbers that stood out to you?
Well, revenue went up by 2%, which, may not sound amazing, but given how the economy is doing, it's actually pretty good.
Steady growth is still growth, right? And I'm guessing all that cost cutting had a good impact on their bottom line.
You got it. Their adjusted EBITDA, which is their earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, also went up 1%. This means they're getting more efficient, squeezing more profit out of each pound they bring in.
So it's not just growth, it's smart growth. Now let's talk cash flow. That's the lifeblood of any business.
Right. And BT Group did very well here. Their normalized free cash flow, meaning the cash they have left over after their necessary capital expenditures, did better than expected, hitting $1.3 billion.
Now that's a number investors love to see. What were the main reasons for this strong cash flow performance?
It's mainly because of those successful cost-saving efforts and because they're past the peak of their fiber build-out, which was super expensive. Now they're starting to see the return on all those investments.
So more cash on hand means more options for the future.
Exactly. They can invest it in new areas, pay off some debt, or give that money back to shareholders as dividends or buy back shares.
Speaking of shareholders, how many individuals are we talking about here?
BT Group has a lot of shareholders, about 614,000 individuals.
Wow, that's a lot of people who are directly affected by their financial performance. So what are they doing for those shareholders? Are they sharing the wealth?
They already announced a 3.9% dividend increase, bringing it up to 8 pence per share.
That's a nice bonus for those investors, especially considering the uncertain times we're in. But are they only focused on short-term rewards, or are they thinking about the long term too?
Well, they've also set this ambitious goal to cut another £3 billion in costs annually by the end of FY29. This shows they're committed to both rewarding shareholders now and making the business more efficient and profitable in the future.
It's a bit of a balancing act. Keep investors happy today while building a stronger business for tomorrow.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance, and their actions so far show they're trying to do both.
Yeah, it's a balancing act for sure, especially with all this talk about sustainability.
Yeah.
That really stood out to me in the report. Their goal to become a circular BT group by 2030 and then a circular tech ecosystem by 2040.
Yeah, me too. Sounds pretty ambitious. But what exactly does a circular BT group even mean? Is it just like recycling old phones? It's a lot bigger than that. It's more like a philosophy that impacts every part of their business, from how they design and make products all the way to how people use them and what happens when they're done with them.
So it's a cradle-to-cradle thing, not just dealing with the waste at the end. What are some examples of how they're actually doing this?
Well, take their e-trade-in program, for example. They've collected over 1 million mobile devices, and a huge 96% of those were either reused or recycled.
That's pretty impressive. I've traded in a few old phones myself. Always feels good knowing they're not just ending up in a landfill somewhere. But what about the equipment that can't be resold?
They have a good system for repairing and refurbishing stuff. Last year, they got back over 2.36 million hubs and set-top boxes and reused a remarkable 71% of them.
So they're really trying to get the most out of their products. What about all the waste from their network and offices? That's got to be a lot.
Yeah, they have a goal of zero waste to landfill by 2030. This year, they produced 69,000 tons of waste globally, which is actually 14% less than the year before, so they're making progress.
It's good to see they're taking these steps to, reduce their environmental impact. But sustainability isn't just about the planet, right? It's about people too.
Absolutely. And BT Group's working on creating a more diverse and inclusive workforce. They've got all sorts of initiatives like their Get Work Ready toolkit to help students develop the skills employers want.
It's about giving everyone a chance to succeed no matter their background. That's
Yeah.
great. What other social impact projects stood out to you?
Well, they're also very involved with local communities. For example, they had over 190 secondary school students visit for National Careers Week, showing them what it's like to work in tech.
That's a great way to get kids interested in STEM and inspire the next generation, right?
Yeah, for sure. And they're very focused on responsible tech, especially when it comes to AI. They've developed their own AI standard for their employees to make sure this powerful technology is used ethically.
So it's not just about building the technology, it's about building it the right way. That's
Mhm.
important.
Totally. And this all connects back to their main purpose, connecting for good. They're not just connecting people, they're connecting them to build a better future.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of good things here. Strong finances, innovative business segments, and a real commitment to sustainability. But let's be real, no business is perfect. What are some of the challenges BT Group needs to face?
I think one of their biggest hurdles is just how competitive the market is. There are so many companies fighting for customers, from small niche providers to huge global companies.
It's a constant battle to win and keep those customers right.
Definitely. And then there's the regulatory side of things. Ofcom, which is the UK's communications regulator, has a big say in how the industry works. And their decisions about stuff like pricing, competition, and sharing infrastructure can really affect how much money BT Group makes.
So they always have to adjust to whatever Ofcom decides. What other factors could create problems for them?
Technological disruption is a constant threat. This industry is always changing, with new technologies popping up all the time. BT Group has to stay flexible and think ahead to keep up.
It's like running a marathon on a treadmill that's constantly getting faster. You can't ever let up.
Exactly. And then there are those big economic trends, inflation, supply chain issues, global politics. All of that can impact their operations and profits.
We all saw how that played out during the pandemic, right? Supply chains got messed up and everyone was uncertain about the economy.
And they specifically mention the possibility of energy shortages and power cuts. That's a risk for their network and services.
Yeah, it makes you realize how much we rely on a steady and dependable energy grid. Any problem there can affect everything.
And there are the challenges that come with those old networks. As they roll out fiber and 5G, they have to shut down their old infrastructure, which can be a big, expensive job.
It's like renovating a house while you're still living in it. You
Yeah.
have to be really careful not to disrupt everything.
And they got to make sure it's a smooth switch for those customers who are still using those older services.
Right, right. Speaking of people, I remember reading something about those worker strikes at BT Group. What's the latest there?
They were able to work things out with the unions and agreed on a 2-year pay deal, so things are better for employees now.
That's good. Happy employees make a productive company, right?
Absolutely. But finding and keeping skilled workers in this competitive job market is a challenge. It's a real fight for talent, and BT Group needs to offer good pay, benefits, and career growth if they want the best people.
It's not just about the tech. It's about the people who make it all work.
Exactly. And let's not forget about cybersecurity. With all that network infrastructure and customer data, they're a big target for hackers. Protecting their systems and data is super important.
Cybersecurity is a huge threat for every business these days, right? It's a constant back and forth with those hackers and cyber criminals.
And then the stakes are high. One successful attack could disrupt everything, leak customer data, and ruin their reputation. They can't afford to be careless.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of the risks and challenges BT Group is facing. But to be fair, they seem to have a good system for managing those risks.
They do. They're always looking at potential problems, coming up with solutions, and investing in what they need to protect their business. They're being proactive, not reactive, which is important in such a fast-changing industry.
But even with the best plans, you never know what might happen.
Right.
They need to be able to adapt and change course if they need to.
One thing they admit they need to work on is using AI more effectively to become more efficient and make more money. They know they could fall behind their competitors if they don't really embrace this technology.
It's a good reminder that innovation isn't just about coming up with new ideas. It's about figuring out how to make them work in your business.
Absolutely. And speaking of innovation, one project really caught my eye. Their pilot program for EV chargers powered by their street cabinets.
Oh yeah, we talked about that earlier. It's a great idea. It's really thinking outside the box.
Yeah, it's a perfect example of them using what they already have in a creative way. They have thousands of these cabinets all over the country, and with a few tweaks, they can turn them into EV charging stations.
It's like they're turning everyday infrastructure into a network of fuel pumps for electric cars. That could be huge.
It's still early days, but it shows they're willing to try new things beyond just their core telecom business. They're looking for ways to be part of a more sustainable future.
It also shows how their different business parts can work together. Imagine combining data from their mobile network with OpenReach's infrastructure to make the charging experience even better.
That's interesting. There are so many possibilities when you start connecting all their different capabilities.
Okay, let's step back for a second and look at where BT Group stands overall. They've had a good financial year, they're moving forward with their strategies, and they're dealing with the challenges they face.
They've built a solid base for growth, but how well they do will depend on whether they can keep adapting to this ever-changing telecom world and, the world in general.
It's a tough industry with plenty of challenges, but they seem ready to handle them. So what are some key things that will determine their success going forward? What should we be watching for?
Well, it all comes down to how well they execute their strategies. They need to keep building that strong fiber and 5G network, create a really great customer experience, and build a culture of innovation and agility across the whole company.
Sounds like they need to be doing everything right, but they can't do everything at once, right?
Exactly. They'll have to make tough choices about where to invest their money, finding that balance between giving returns to shareholders now and investing in growth for the future. It's something every company has to figure out.
And of course, they'll have to deal with those regulations we talked about. What Ofcom decides about pricing, competition, and sharing infrastructure will have a big effect on their profits.
Yeah, regulations are a mixed bag, right? On the one hand, they can make things fair and protect consumers, but on the other hand, they can slow down innovation and make it harder to make money. It's a balancing act for both regulators and businesses.
Sounds like BT Group has a lot to juggle. But let's not forget, with all these numbers and strategies, it's people who matter most. They have over 100,000 employees and millions of customers.
Right. At the end of the day, their success depends on their employees and their customers.
Their commitment to creating a diverse and inclusive workplace is a good sign. And focusing on a better customer experience is essential, especially with so much competition out there.
They've been putting in the effort to make customers happy, and it seems to be working. Their BT Group Net Promoter Score, or NPS, went up a point this year.
For those who don't know, NPS measures how loyal customers are and how likely they are to recommend the company. So a higher score is usually good.
Yeah, it means they're on the right track. But they
Well,
can't get complacent. The telecom world never stops changing, and neither do customers' expectations.
okay. We've looked at their business, their finances, their sustainability efforts, and even the risks and challenges they face. This has been a thorough deep dive.
You've covered it all.
So as we wrap up, here's something to think about. We've seen how BT Group is shaping the future of connectivity in the UK, but what about your own digital future?
How will you use technology to achieve your goals, connect with people, and make a positive impact?
It's an amazing time to be alive. Technology is changing faster than ever. The tools are there. The possibilities are endless. It's up to us to make the most of it all.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into BT Group's performance in 2024. It's been really interesting.
We hope you learned something valuable about the company, the industry, and maybe even about your own journey in this digital world. And remember, the best way to stay informed is to keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep exploring.